The first warning was not the scream. It was the sound of 6 horses running too fast on frozen ground. Ruth Copley heard the pounding before she saw the stagecoach break through the morning haze beyond the outer gate of Two Willows. One wheel struck the edge of a buried rut. The coach lurched hard enough to throw a passenger against the side. The lead pair had foam on their bits, and the inside grey was fighting the line with its head twisted wrong. "Drag chain!" Ruth shouted. The stable boy had not come that morning, so there was no one to answer. She ran for the length of iron coiled beside the repair shed, hooked one end through the yard post, and hauled the other across the approach. "Driver, take them left when I call it. Don't saw the grey's mouth. Give him room." The driver stared at her as if a widow standing in a frozen yard had no right to command 6 panicked animals. Then the coach hit another rut, and pride lost its value. A broad-shouldered passenger climbed over the forward rail beside him. His hat vanished under the wheels. "What do you need?" he called. "Get hold of the outside leader's line, not the bit. Turn him when I tell you." The stranger moved without wasting words. He braced one boot against the iron footboard and reached across the driver. The coach bore down on the gate. Ruth dragged the chain higher. The first pair saw it too late. Now! The driver pulled left. The stranger gave the outside leader a firm, measured turn. The team broke sideways. The chain caught beneath the front axle, skipped once, then bit into the frozen yard. Wood shrieked against iron. The coach swung broadside and stopped less than 10 feet from the stable wall. One broken brace snapped backward and struck the stranger across his left shoulder. He dropped to one knee but kept hold of the line until the horses stopped fighting. Ruth reached the team first. "Easy," she said, one hand on the grey's neck. "Easy now." The animal trembled beneath her palm. Behind her, passengers groaned and called for help. She turned only after the horse's eyes had begun to clear. The stranger was standing again, though his left arm hung nearer his body than the right. "Can you move your fingers?" she asked. He opened and closed his hand. "Yes, wrist?" He turned it. "Shoulder. Hurts." That was not the question. He lifted the arm a few inches and stopped before pain forced him to prove more. "It moves. Then leave it alone until I see it." Ruth set the passengers in order. One woman had struck her brow. An older man had twisted his knee. A boy was frightened but unhurt. Blankets came from the relay room. Hot bricks went beneath boots. The driver helped once his hands stopped shaking. No one thanked Ruth. That was common. People remembered shelter more easily than the person who kept it ready. The stranger did not ask to be seen first. He held a blanket around the boy's shoulders with his good arm and waited. When Ruth finally examined him, the shoulder was already darkening beneath his shirt near the collar. No bone sat wrong. No joint had slipped. "Bruised," she said. "Not broken. No lifting, roping, or reaching above your head for several days." I wasn't planning to rope anything. Men rarely plan the foolish part. His mouth moved as though he might smile, but he thought better of it. The driver came toward them, carrying a black iron plate. "This was on the post above, the washout," he said. "Arrow sent us east." Ruth took it from him. The metal was cold and heavy. White paint marked the number TW4. One upper corner was bent. 3 punch marks showed beneath the paint. She knew those marks. The plate belonged at the true South Fork, 4 miles from Two Willows, where it had directed company stages for 6 years. "You're certain this was mounted above the washout?" she asked. "Bolted to fresh cedar." "I tore it loose after we stopped." Ruth turned the plate over. New cedar dust clung beneath the lower bolt hole. Someone had not merely knocked the sign down. Someone had removed it from its assigned post, carried it to the wrong road, and mounted it on new wood. The stranger had come near enough to see. "Company marker?" he asked. "Private stage line, not county road property." "Who benefits if the line calls this station unsafe?" Ruth studied him. "That is a sharper question than asking who moved it." Hoofbeats sounded beyond the gate. A wagon came fast from the north, followed by 2 riders. Mason Grigg sat beside the driver in a dark coat, buttoned high. His roadhouse stood nearer Belle Fourche, but not near enough for him to have heard about the wreck, and reached Two Willows this quickly. Mason stepped down before the wagon stopped rolling. His eyes went first to the stage, then to the iron plate in Ruth's hands. Only after that did he look at her. "Bad business," he said. "A passenger line can't afford a relay where coaches run wild. The coach followed a false marker, or the marker was put where your people left it." Ruth raised the plate. This came from the company post at the South Fork. Mason's gaze shifted toward the stranger. Recognition passed between the 2 men. Small, unmistakable. "Brant," Mason said. The stranger's face did not change. "Grigg." Ruth heard more in the names than either man offered. Mason turned back to her. "A widow alone can't keep every shelter stocked, every road marked, and every team sound through winter. The company will hear my report before yours. Then tell them the passengers are alive, because they reached Two Willows. They nearly died reaching it, because someone sent them off the maintained road." Mason's jaw tightened. "You should consider whether this place has become too much for one woman. You should consider why you arrived before anyone sent for you." One of his riders looked away. Mason did not. "Stage schedules aren't secrets. No wrecks are." The cold sharpened between them. Mason glanced once more at the plate, then climbed back into his wagon. "Winter has a way of settling prices," he said. "Only for men who mistake weather for ownership," Ruth answered. He left without offering help. By afternoon, the driver admitted the damaged wheel and split brace would keep the stage at Two Willows through the coming cold front. The passengers took the downstairs rooms. The stranger gave his name as Wesley Brant and said his last cattle work had ended near Belle Fourche. His next job would not begin before spring. Ruth considered the broken stage, the missing marker, the empty bunk in the barn loft, and the fact that winter work had just become more dangerous than one pair of hands could manage. She found Wesley beside the stable, studying the damaged brace without touching it. "I can offer wages," she said. "Meals. A bunk in the loft. The work is teams, shelters, road checks, repairs, and whatever winter breaks next." "How long?" "Until the road opens." She held his gaze. "You do not enter my office without asking. You do not move company property without telling me. You do not speak for me because another man refuses to listen." Wesley glanced toward the road where Mason's wagon had disappeared. What does the work require? Not what did it pay. Not what would he own. Ruth noticed. That you return when you say you will, that you report what you see, not what you hope to prove, and that when I tell you a horse, road, or person is not safe, you listen. I can do that. You may stay until winter ends. Wesley looked at her then, directly and without presumption. The moment held no promise beyond what she had offered. Still, Ruth felt the weight of a man who traveled with everything tied behind his saddle, choosing, for now, to stand still. In her office, the iron plate waited beside the locked tin box. Fresh cedar dust remained beneath the bolt hole. Outside, Mason Grigg had arrived too soon, and somewhere between the true fork and the washout, someone had begun using Ruth's road to make her look unfit to keep it. By daylight, the black iron plate was locked inside Ruth's office tin box, and Wesley Brant had learned that being hired did not mean being trusted. Ruth made that plain without insult. "You may sleep in the loft, eat at my table, and work where I assign you," she said. "The office remains mine unless I ask you in." Wesley stood in the doorway with his left arm close to his side. The bruise had darkened overnight beneath his shirt, but his fingers moved. His wrist turned, and the shoulder sat where it belonged. Understood. No roping, no overhead lifting, no hard riding. "You left me very little to impress you with." That was deliberate. She closed the tin box and turned the key. He accepted the answer without pretending pain did not matter. That was the first useful thing he did that morning. The second was letting Ruth choose his horse. She gave him the patient dun instead of his sharper gelding and kept their pace slow toward the true South Fork. Frost silvered the grass along the maintained road. The stage passengers remained at Two Willows, while the driver and a wheelwright from a passing freight outfit assessed the damage. Ruth had no intention of waiting for a company man from Belle Fourche to tell her whether the road marker had moved. 4 miles south of the ranch, the cedar post stood bare beside the fork. Its base leaned a fraction west, as it had since Henry set a stone beneath it 6 winters earlier. The iron plate was gone. Ruth dismounted and brushed frozen dirt from the post with one glove. 2 bolt holes showed clean wood around the edges. "Backed out," Wesley said from the saddle. "Not pulled." Ruth glanced up. "You can see that from there." "I can see there's no split." He did not dismount until she nodded. When he did, he used his right hand on the saddle horn and kept the injured shoulder still. Ruth measured the holes against the spacing she remembered from TW4. Same distance, same lower angle. Whoever had taken the plate had used a wrench rather than brute force. "That narrows it," Wesley said, "to anyone with a wrench, and time, and knowledge no one would interrupt them." Ruth crouched beside a faint wheel mark where the road shoulder hardened into frozen clay. A timber wagon had passed recently, perhaps 2. The ruts angled toward the cut used by Mason Griggs haulers, but wind had scoured the upper layer and older traffic crossed beneath it. "Mason's Road," Wesley said. "The mark leads that direction. Direction is not proof." "No," he did not argue. Instead, he walked the edge of the road, studying the ground without touching what frost still preserved. One narrow wheel, one wider, could be the same wagon with uneven tires. Could be any freight rig from Belle Fourche. Yes. Ruth watched him stop himself from building certainty where none existed. Most men believed confidence could replace evidence if spoken firmly enough. Wesley seemed to understand that a wrong accusation could damage her almost as badly as a false sign. They continued toward the pine emergency shelter 2 miles beyond the fork. Ruth had stocked it before the first hard freeze with split pine, 2 blankets, lamp oil, matches sealed in waxed cloth, and a small sack of oats. Travelers did not always stop at Two Willows. The shelter existed for the ones who misjudged weather, lost a wheel, or trusted distance more than cold. Its door stood shut. The latch was intact. Inside, the blankets remained folded on the bench. The lamp held oil. The oats had not been touched. The wood rack was empty. Ruth crossed the small room and knelt beside the stove. No fresh ash, no burned bark, no soot on the doorseam. "Travelers didn't use it," she said. Wesley's stood near the threshold, leaving room for her to move. Someone carried it away. Behind the shelter, parallel grooves cut through the frozen crust and ended near the timber track. Sled runners. newer than the last thaw, though the wind had softened their edges. Ruth followed them until bare ground swallowed the marks. "Which way?" she asked. Wesley studied the scoring. "Away from the rack." "I know that. After 20 yards, I don't." He pointed with his right hand. Wind filled the west groove, deeper, could make it look eastbound when it wasn't. Ruth rose. "You are not eager to tell me what I want to hear." "I don't know what you want to hear. That Mason Grigg did this." "Did he?" "I do not know." "Then neither do I." The answer should have irritated her. Instead, it settled one question and opened another. Wesley knew Mason. He had not explained how. Yet when a simple accusation might have pleased her, he withheld it. Restraint could be honesty. It could also be caution from a man protecting his own involvement. Ruth added the missing wood to the list in her pocket notebook. The blankets stay. The oil stays. The oats stay. Wesley looked at the empty rack. Why take only fuel? Because a cold traveler can survive hunger longer than a night without heat. And a false marker sends travelers where the shelter matters most. Ruth met his gaze. He had reached the larger question without dramatizing it. Someone had not merely tried to make Two Willows look careless. Someone had arranged for care to fail at the exact place where a mistake became deadly. They returned to the ranch by noon. The stage wheel could not wait for a trip to Belle Fourche, so Ruth set a seasoned ash spoke, reheated the iron tire, and ordered Wesley to hold the rim steady with his good arm. "If the shoulder pulls, release it. The wheel will fall. Then I will reset it, and if I pretend it doesn't hurt, you will be useless longer." He gave her the sort of look men gave inconvenient truth. Then he obeyed. Heat rose from the iron in waves. Ruth fitted the spoke, checked the hub, and reached for the wrench. At the same moment, Wesley moved it closer. Their fingers met over the wooden handle. His skin was warm from the work. Hers was cold from the yard. The contact lasted less than a breath. Wesley released first and moved his hand back to the rim. He did not smile. He did not turn accident into invitation. Ruth tightened the final nut and told herself the awareness beneath her glove came from heat alone. By supper, the stage brace had been splintered for temporary travel. The passengers had stopped fearing every sound from the yard, and Wesley's bedroll sat in the loft with its braided rawhide strap drawn tight around it. He had agreed to remain through winter. His belongings still looked prepared to leave before dawn. Ruth noticed because she noticed anything that might fail under strain. They were halfway through stew when hoofbeats stopped outside. A narrow-faced man in a yellow scarf entered the kitchen without removing his hat. Ruth recognized him as one of Mason Grigg's hired hands. He set a sealed envelope beside Wesley's bowl. "From Mr. Grigg." Wesley did not touch it. "What does he want?" "Says you'll know." The man left before Ruth could ask another question. Cold air followed him through the door. Wesley stared at the envelope. Ruth saw recognition in the set of his mouth, not surprise. "You know his hand," she said. "Yes. Do you know what is inside?" "Not yet." He picked up the envelope and slipped it into his coat unopened. Ruth returned to her stew, though the question had already taken its place between them. Mason had known where Wesley would be. More troubling, Wesley had known Mason well enough not to ask why he had written. Wesley waited until the kitchen lamp went dark before he opened Mason Grigg's envelope. The barn loft held the smell of hay, leather, and cold boards. His bedroll lay against the wall with the braided rawhide strap drawn tight around it. He sat beside it, using his right hand to break the seal, while his bruised left shoulder rested close to his body. A $5 bill slid into his lap. Beneath it lay one folded sheet. report what winter will make her take. Wesley read the sentence twice. 3 days before the stage wreck, he had stopped at Griggs' Roadhouse looking for winter work. Mason had offered him money to pass through Two Willows, judge the barns, count the relay traffic, look at the spring, and decide whether Ruth Copley might sell before thaw. At the time, it had sounded like an ugly piece of commercial scouting, not a plan that would send a stage toward a washout. Wesley had told Mason only what any rider could see from the road. Two Willows was maintained. The spring ran strong, the barns were sound, and the station had no permanent hired man. He had not entered Ruth's office. He had not seen her accounts. He had not named a price. The stage wreck had altered the meaning of every question Mason asked. A man who wanted to buy cheap might spread rumors. A man who moved route markers and emptied emergency shelters was willing to gamble with lives. Wesley folded the note along its old crease and put it with the $5 inside his coat. He should have carried both downstairs then. Ruth was awake before dawn most mornings. He could have placed the truth on her kitchen table before she fed the stove. Instead, he told himself he needed one fact Mason could not deny. It was a respectable reason. It was also not the whole one. If Ruth knew why he had first come near Two Willows, she might send him back onto the road before his shoulder healed. Worse, she might look at every useful thing he did and wonder whether he had measured its value for another man. By sunrise, Wesley had chosen silence. On November 7th, Ruth loaded split pine onto a low sled and assigned him the dun again. "You may guide the horse," she said. "You may not lift the back end if it catches. You have a narrow opinion of my judgment. I watched you consider lifting it before I spoke." He did not deny that. They carried the wood to the pine shelter in 3 small loads rather than one heavy one. Ruth stacked the pieces with the barked sides toward the wall and the driest cuts nearest the stove. Wesley studied the angle of the rear rack. "Wind comes through that seam," he said. "If we turn the bottom row crosswise, it keeps snow from packing under." Ruth examined the gap. "Show me without lifting." He used one piece as a pointer. She changed the pattern herself, then let him arrange the lighter logs with his good hand. The alteration was practical. More important, he had offered it without seizing the work from her. By the 3rd load, the shelter smelled of fresh pine again. Ruth marked the count in her notebook. "If it disappears, we will know how much and when. You think they will come back. Someone removed wood twice. Hope is not a lock. Neither is a notebook. No, it is what remains after a liar speaks." Wesley felt the note inside his coat, as though the paper had grown heavier. "Mason offered me scouting work before I came here," he said. Ruth stopped writing. "What sort of scouting?" "Property, roads, water. For Two Willows?" "Yes. Did you take it?" He could have answered with one word. Instead, he chose the smallest truth that protected the largest secret. Not the work he wanted. Ruth closed the notebook. "That sounds shaped. It is the answer I have." "Then it is not yet the answer I asked for." She returned the pencil to her pocket and walked toward the sled. Wesley followed, carrying only what his shoulder allowed. That afternoon, Mason Grigg arrived at Two Willows in a clean wagon with no freight behind it. He came prepared for business rather than rescue. Ruth met him in the yard. Wesley stood near the stable door, close enough to hear and far enough not to enter the bargain. Mason removed one glove. "The company will review its northern stops after winter." "Mr. Aldrich told you that?" Ruth asked. "He told every contractor with sense enough to listen. 2 full relay stations cost more than one." "Then run yours well." Mason's smile held no warmth. My roadhouse sits closer to Belle Fourche freight. Your spring sits where the company needs water. Put them together, and the line saves money. The spring is mine, the relay barn is yours, the contract is the company's. And none of those three things becomes the other because you say them in one sentence. Mason glanced toward Wesley. Brant understands practical arrangements. Ruth did not follow his gaze. What are you offering? Cash for the spring lot and relay barn. I take over winter service if the company agrees. You keep the house and south pasture. You are offering to buy the part that keeps the rest alive. I am offering before weather lowers the value. Weather does not own my land. No, but it settles prices. Mason stepped nearer, lowering his voice as though kindness required privacy. Your husband is gone. Hired men leave when roads open. One bad winter can empty a station faster than one bad customer can. Ruth's face did not change, but Wesley saw her fingers close once around the edge of her apron. Henry has been dead 3 years, she said. His death did not make this place available. It made it heavy. Heavy is not the same as for sale. Mason named a figure. It was low enough to be insult, high enough to prove he wanted the spring badly. Ruth refused before he finished explaining payment. You should think until thaw, Mason said. I already thought before you arrived. Winter may improve your judgment. Then yours should be remarkable by spring. Mason's mouth flattened. He looked at Wesley. You were easier to hire last week. Ruth turned then. Were you? Wesley held her gaze. The $5 rested inside his coat. He offered scouting work, and I did not take the work he wanted. Mason gave a soft laugh. That is a neat answer. Ruth's attention remained on Wesley. Yes, she said, it is. Mason climbed into his wagon. Before leaving, he called back, the company will keep one winter stop. Decide whether you want to be paid before it decides for you. Ruth watched the wagon disappear north. Only when the road was empty did she move toward the stable. Wesley followed. You knew about the company review? She asked. Mason mentioned it at his roadhouse. And you did not think to tell me? I had no proof it was settled. You could have told me it was being discussed. Yes, that is different from proof. Yes. Ruth set one hand on the stable latch. You know the distinction when it protects Mason from accusation. Learn it when it protects me from surprise. The correction landed cleanly. Wesley did not defend himself. Inside, his bedroll remained visible on the loft platform, tied for departure. Ruth saw it. Your agreement ends when the road opens, she said. I know. Men have promised me spring before. Her voice was level, but the words carried older weight. Some meant it. Henry meant every promise he made. Then fever took him, and the house, the debts, the teams, and every unfinished repair became mine in a week. No betrayal, no warning, only absence. Wesley said nothing. Afterward, hired hands stayed through snow and left when cattle work returned. I learned not to call a season forever. What if I want to stay forever? The question left him before caution could shape it. Ruth faced him fully. There was no mockery in her expression, no softness either. Then you should not ask in the same week you arrived. Wesley accepted the distance she placed between desire and evidence. Fair. Desire is not proof. No. And I will not build a life on the strength of a question. You should not. For a breath, neither moved. The stable held the muted sounds of horses, shifting in their stalls and wind pressing against the boards. Wesley wanted to touch her. He did not. Ruth lifted the latch and stepped away. Tomorrow we check the south shelter. I will be ready. Be honest before you are useful. She left him with the words. That night, Wesley took the empty envelope to the yard stove and fed it into the fire. The seal blackened, curled, and disappeared. He kept the note. He kept the $5. In the loft above the stable, his bedroll remained bound tight enough for travel, while below it, the man who had asked about forever chose one more night of concealment. By the morning of November 11th, Ruth had decided two things. Mason Grigg would not be allowed to tell the company her story first, and Wesley Brant's unanswered question would not be mistaken for an answer. She wrapped TW4 in burlap, placed the iron plate beneath the wagon seat, and locked her office before daylight. Wesley waited beside the light wagon with the team already harnessed. His left shoulder moved more freely than it had a week earlier, though he still used his right arm for the heavier trace. "Belle Fourche?" he asked. "The company office. You want me there?" "I want a witness who saw the wrong marker before anyone had time to invent a different version." Wesley nodded once. He did not ask whether Ruth trusted him. That helped more than asking would have. The 12-mile road took nearly 4 hours under a low gray sky. Frozen ruts jarred the wagon, and Ruth kept the team below a trot where the north cut narrowed. Wesley braced with his good arm and said nothing about the shoulder until she noticed him roll it against the cold. Still stiff, less than yesterday. That was not the measure. It aches when the wheel drops hard. Ruth slowed the horses. He did not protest. Belle Fourche rose from the winter flats in smoke, freight noise, and the sharp smell of horse yards. The private stage and freight company kept its office beside a long loading shed near the main wagon road. Mr. Aldrich, the regional superintendent, was a narrow man with silver at his temples and ink along 2 fingers. He looked first at Ruth, then at Wesley, then at the wrapped plate. "Mrs. Copley," he said. "Mr. Grigg has already filed a complaint regarding unsafe direction at Two Willows. Then you may read mine beside it." Ruth set the burlap on his desk and uncovered TW4. Aldrich lifted the plate with both hands. "Bent upper corner," he said. 3 punch marks beneath the paint. He crossed to a wall register, opened it, and ran one finger down the page. Number assigned to the South Fork below Two Willows. Mounted 6 years ago. It was found above the washout on November 3rd, Ruth said, bolted to fresh cedar. Aldrich turned it over and examined the dust caught beneath the lower hole. This was not torn loose. "The post at the true fork is not split," Wesley said. Aldrich glanced at him. "You inspected it?" "Mrs. Copley did. I saw the bolt holes. And who are you?" "Wesley Brant. Working at Two Willows through winter." Aldrich returned his attention to Ruth. "Mr. Grigg says a widow operating without permanent staff cannot keep every marker and shelter under control. A theft does not become incompetence because the thief chooses a widow's road." The superintendent's expression changed by a fraction. "The company has not decided theft occurred. Then decide what the plate proves and what it does not." Ruth opened her route book. She showed him the last recorded inspection of the true fork before the stage wreck, the pine shelter inventory, the missing wood, and the second resupply count. No accusation, only dates, weather, locations, and quantities. Aldrich read in silence. "The company will review its northern stops after winter," he said at last. "You heard that from Grigg?" "He told me enough." "Then hear the rest from me. Freight volume has risen nearer Belle Fourche, but maintaining 2 full winter relay stops costs money. After thaw, the directors may keep one. Reliable water, safe approaches, sound teams, and a clean winter record will matter. Two Willows has the only dependable spring on that stretch, which is why this matter is serious." Ruth closed the route book. Serious to whom? To you, to Grigg, and to every passenger who follows a company marker. Then do not leave the marker's custody uncertain. Aldrich set TW4 down. You want a receipt? I want its number, condition, date, and the fact that I surrendered it intact. He studied her, perhaps expecting the request to soften under scrutiny. It did not. Aldrich pulled a company form from his desk and wrote in a firm hand. Black iron root plate, TW4, bent upper corner, 3 punch marks, fresh cedar dust beneath lower bolt hole, received November 14th, from Ruth Copley of Two Willows. He signed, sanded the ink, and passed the paper across. Ruth read every line before adding her name. You have 30 days, Aldrich said. If another unresolved safety failure occurs, the company may suspend winter use of Two Willows until inquiry. And if the failure is caused by sabotage, bring proof. I have been bringing it. You have brought warning. Then keep watching while it becomes proof. Aldrich carried TW4 to a locked iron cabinet behind his desk. Ruth watched him place it inside and turn the key. The plate had left her possession. The receipt had not. She folded it into her route book. Outside, a freight driver was cursing beside a wagon with one rear wheel chocked against the loading yard slope. The brake block had cracked through the center. A yard hand saw Wesley and called, Brant, you know wagons. Tell me whether that will hold to the north cut. Wesley looked at Ruth instead. Do you want to see it? I already do. She crossed the yard. The driver's doubt arrived before she touched the brake. I asked the man. Then you asked the wrong person. Ruth removed the broken block and examined the grain. The wood had been cut across the strain instead of with it. A replacement sat on the wagon bed, newly shaped and just as badly cut. This one will split under load, she said. It's ash, the driver answered. Ash cut wrong still, breaks. Brant? Wesley crouched beside the wheel but kept both hands clear. Her repair. The driver frowned. I need a name on the yard ticket. Wesley's voice remained even. Her name. Ruth selected a seasoned block from the yard rack, trimmed the fit, and set it beneath the brake arm. Wesley blocked the wheel when she asked and stayed out of her reach while she worked. No reaching over her shoulder. No correction offered for the sake of being seen. When the block was seated, Ruth ordered the team, walked up the shallow rise, and brought down under load. The brake held. The driver tested it a second time before signing the repair ticket. Ruth Copley, he read aloud, as if the name had become harder to dismiss now that the wagon had stopped where she said it would. He paid her directly. On the road home, the sky lowered and the wind sharpened from the northwest. Wesley waited until Belle Fourche was several miles behind them before speaking. 3 nights before the wreck, I saw 2 of Grigg's timber wagons near the False Fork. Ruth kept the lines steady. Why did you not say so before? Because fresh cedar and timber wagons are not the same as a stolen plate. You knew the wagons were his. Yes. What were they carrying? Covered loads. Could have been cut boards. Could have been tools. I could not see. Who drove? One man I did not know. One with a yellow scarf. Ruth thought of the hired man who had delivered Mason's envelope. You recognized him at my table. Yes, and still waited. I had a direction, not proof. Ruth absorbed that without forgiving the delay. Next time, give me both, what you saw and what you cannot prove. I will. They reached the pine shelter near dusk. Ruth stopped to check the resupply before losing daylight. The door remained latched. Inside, the blankets and lamp were untouched. The rack was empty again. Every split piece had been removed. Behind the shelter, 2 sets of boot prints marked the frozen ground. One outer heel was worn down. The other print had a broad, square toe. No wagon tracks came close enough to explain the load. Wesley stood beside Ruth, not ahead of her. "Fresh," he said, "since yesterday's frost." Ruth knelt and measured the heel mark against her pocket rule. 2 men carried it to something waiting beyond the rise. A sled would leave lighter marks on hard ground, and wind could have taken them. Yes. Ruth wrote the facts before darkness erased the edges. She did not name Mason, not yet, but the question had grown larger than who stole wood or moved iron. Someone understood the company's 30-day warning. Someone knew another failure might cost Ruth the relay contract, and someone had returned to the shelter after TW4 entered company custody, as though the missing plate had never been the only weapon. By November 15th, Ruth had stopped asking whether someone meant to damage Two Willows and begun measuring how often they returned. She recorded the 2 boot prints from the pine shelter before frost softened their edges. 1 outer heel worn low, 1 broad square toe. She marked the missing wood, the weather, and the hour. She did not write Mason Griggs' name. Evidence did not improve by being hurried. The shelter resupply changed that morning. Instead of hauling 1 full winter load, Ruth divided the wood into smaller stacks and varied the delivery days. She counted lamp oil, blankets, oats, and split pine twice, then made Wesley repeat the figures without looking at her notebook. He got 1 blanket count wrong, corrected himself, and did not pretend otherwise. "Why irregular loads?" he asked. "Because a thief can plan around habit. And if they watch the ranch, then they will learn I change habits." Wesley began route checks under written instructions. He left at the hour Ruth named, followed the road she assigned, and returned when he said he would. If weather delayed him, he sent word through the nearest passing freight team. His reports remained spare. A fresh horse track near the South Fork, no disturbed wood at the lower shelter. 1 wagon rut toward Griggs' timber cut, too old to identify. Ruth found herself waiting for his observations, because he did not improve them for effect. Over 9 days, that became its own form of evidence. His shoulder improved as the bruise faded from black to yellow. He could ride moderate distances and repair low work, but Ruth still forbade heavy lifting above his head. When the north stable door sagged against its frame, Wesley removed the lower hinge, reset the pins, and planed the swollen edge with patient strokes. Henry had once solved such trouble with a shoulder and a curse. Wesley solved it by making the wood fit. "You are losing wages while I keep you from full work," Ruth said when she counted out his first week's pay. "The shoulder happened before I took the job. It happened while you helped stop my stage. Not your stage, my yard, my chain, my road." She added $2 for the days his injury had limited him. Wesley looked at the coins. "That is more than the work. It is the cost of the work." Pride rose in his face, then stopped before becoming refusal. He pocketed the money. Ruth noticed that too. On November 21st, they took the light wagon to Belle Fourche for lamp oil, salt, and harness rivets. The road was hard enough for the wheels to hold, but the wind carried the smell of snow. At Hales's store, Ruth set her order on the counter. Mr. Hales read it, rubbed his thumb along the paper, and glanced toward 2 freight men near the stove. "I can give you 1 tin of oil for cash. I asked for 4 on the usual 30-day account. Usual terms depend on usual certainty. My account has never been late." "No," Hales lowered his voice, "but Griggs says the company may suspend Two Willows before Christmas. I cannot carry 4 tins against a relay that may not be operating." Ruth felt the insult in the carefulness of his tone. He was not calling her dishonest. He was pricing the harm done to her as though harm were proof. 1 tin for cash, she said. 2 more against the cured hides delivered Tuesday. The 4th against 2 bushels of dried beans after month's end. Hales considered. The hides must be clean. They are. Beans dry. They are. Then agreed. Ruth paid for the first tin and signed no debt she could not meet. Wesley remained beside the counter without offering money, argument, or rescue. That restraint cost him. She saw it in the set of his jaw. Mason entered before Hales finished wrapping the rivets. He was followed by his timber foreman and a narrow-faced buyer from farther north. "Mrs. Copley," Mason said, "I hear credit is getting expensive. Only for men who mistake rumor for collateral." Hales found sudden interest in the ledger. Mason removed one glove. "My offer still stands. It was low before you brought an audience. Circumstances have changed. The company warning reduced the value of your relay." "You mean the damage done to my route reduced the price you want to pay?" Mason named a figure lower than the first. One freight man near the stove turned his head. Ruth kept her voice even. "You do not get to damage the roof and then price the house in the rain." Mason's foreman gave a short laugh and stopped when Mason glanced at him. "That is a serious accusation. Then be grateful I did not name the man holding the hammer." Mason stepped nearer. "You are alone out there. 1 widow, 1 damaged hired man, and a road winter has barely begun to test." Ruth saw Wesley move before she heard his boot. Not fast. 1 step. Enough. She closed her hand around his right wrist. Warm leather beneath her palm. Strength held under skin and bone. Wesley stopped at once. He did not turn his arm, pull free, or make the contact into possession. He waited. Ruth spoke to Mason without releasing him. "My judgment does not require your permission or his fist." "Short rein," Mason said, looking at Wesley. "Does she always keep you that way?" Wesley's attention stayed on Ruth. "Do you want me to answer?" "No." "Then I won't." The answer landed harder than a threat. Ruth let go when she chose. Mason's expression sharpened. "Winter will tell you both what obedience is worth." "Winter has already told me what your word is worth," Ruth said, and it came without a receipt. Mason left the store with his witnesses and no agreement. The room breathed again after the door shut, but no one apologized for having watched. Ruth gathered the oil and rivets. Hales slid 1 extra wick across the counter. "No charge." Ruth pushed a penny toward him. "Then charge it," he accepted. On the road home, Wesley held the reins while Ruth kept the oil tin braced against the wagon floor. For 2 miles neither spoke. "I should not have stepped toward him," he said. "No, I thought he was trying to shame you. He was." "I wanted to stop it." "You wanted to answer it with a kind of force he understands." "Yes, that would have made his story stronger. A widow running an unsafe relay with a violent drifter at her gate." Wesley's mouth tightened. "Next time, ask me to stand down." Ruth turned her head. "I did." He met the correction without defense. "You did, and you stopped." "Yes." The wrist she had held seemed newly present between them, though no part of him touched her now. Ruth looked ahead at the frozen road. That matters more than wanting to fight. He did not ask whether it changed how she saw him. He let the fact remain small and unfinished. They reached Two Willows near dusk. Wesley unloaded the oil with his good arm and carried the lighter supplies into the shed. Ruth entered the payment in her ledger, added Hales's barter terms, and wrote Mason's second offer beneath the first. Lower price, public witnesses. Company warning cited as reason. The pattern had become visible, even if the law beneath it had not. 3 mornings later, on November 24th, the emergency bell rang before grey light reached the yard. Ruth came from the house, fastening her coat. A rider leaned over the neck of a lathered pony, breath smoking around his face. "Upper shelter lantern's dark," he said. "Freight wagon left Belle Fourche yesterday afternoon. Never came through." Wesley emerged from the stable with one glove on and the other between his teeth. Ruth looked north. Snow had begun to move across the road in thin white sheets. Missing wood had been warning. A dark lantern meant someone had taken away the last thing an overdue driver might see. Ruth was saddled before the rider finished telling her which bend had gone dark. She sent him inside for coffee and ordered Wesley to take the dun instead of his own gelding. "The upper shelter is 7 miles, she said. "Your shoulder will tighten before we reach it." "It already has." "Then do not make me prove I noticed." Snow moved low across the yard, fine enough to hide the shallow ruts and thin enough to let the main road show beneath. Ruth packed a shielded lantern, 2 blankets, a shovel, a spare trace, rope, and a small tin of salve for cracked leather. Wesley fastened the load with his right hand and did not offer to lift what she had already assigned herself. They left before daylight, riding into a north wind that cut beneath collars and made the horses lower their heads. At the true South Fork, the maintained road carried one heavy wagon track, the right rut dug deeper than the left. "A Nevin pull," Wesley said. 1 horse favoring a leg. Ruth pressed 2 fingers into the frozen edge, passed yesterday before the temperature dropped. They followed the track toward the upper bend. The shelter lantern should have shown from half a mile away a steady amber point above the cutbank. Nothing burned there. The shelter emerged as a dark square against the snow. Ruth dismounted and opened the weather box. The lamp remained in its bracket, oil half full, wick trimmed. The glass chimney was gone. No shards lay below. "Wind did not take it," she said. Wesley touched the metal collar with one bare finger, lifted clean. Inside, 2 blankets remained folded. A few armloads of wood sat beneath the bench, enough for 1 night if used sparingly. Someone had not emptied this shelter. They had only taken the part that made its light useful in wind. Then Ruth heard a faint chain strike metal beyond the bend. Once, twice, uneven. "West cut," she said. Wesley was already beside the dun, but he waited until she mounted before following. They found the freight wagon half a mile farther on, stalled behind a drift where the road narrowed between slope and frozen drainage. The driver had dug at the rear wheels until his hands shook. One bay trembled in the traces. The other held its right foreleg stiff. "Stop digging," Ruth called. The driver stared at her. "Wheels are buried to the hubs, and the team is facing uphill against the drift. You will exhaust them before the wagon moves. If I turn them, I lose the road. You already lost it." She went to the horses. The injured bay had a shallow cut at the fetlock, swollen but not broken. "We turn the team first, then free the downhill wheel and bring the rear axle back at an angle." The driver looked past her toward Wesley. "You agree with that?" Wesley swung down, protecting his left side. "She asked for your lines, not my opinion." Ruth held out her hand. The driver gave them to her. She assigned Wesley the rope at the rear axle and told him to take strain from his hips. No jerking with the shoulder. He looped the rope low and braced where she pointed. Ruth backed the team 3 short steps, eased the near horse outward, and let the wagon settle downhill by inches. Now, Wesley took strain. The rear wheel shifted. Snow broke loose beneath the rim. Ruth kept the team moving until the wagon stood crosswise enough to free the uphill wheel. Only then did they dig. It took nearly an hour. Cold whitened Wesley's lips once when the rope pulled against his left side. Ruth moved him to the wheel and made the driver take the next strain. Wesley obeyed, without pretending the pain was gone. When the wagon finally rolled back onto packed road, the driver leaned against the box and laughed once from relief. Thought I would freeze beside that load. "Why did you pass the shelter?" Ruth asked. A blue board pointed west before the bend. "White Arrow," said Two Willows' route. "Where is it now?" "Gone. Saw it at dusk. Walked back before dawn and found only a fresh post hole." "Who was near it?" The driver rubbed his hands together. "One man with a sorrel horse, narrow face, yellow scarf. Ruth saw it." "You know him?" "I have seen him at Griggs' yard." "Name?" "No." "Would you know him again?" "Yes." Ruth bound the horse's fetlock, repaired the damaged trace, and fitted her own lantern into the upper bracket. "You will stop at Two Willows," she told the driver. "Warm yourself and the team before going farther. I can reach Belle Fourche. You already spent one night proving poor judgment. Do not buy another." Wesley lowered his head to hide the edge of a smile. By the time they returned, the first snow had settled into the yard. The rescue might have been dismissed as winter trouble. If the missing chimney, vanished blue board, and yellow scarf had stood alone. They did not. Over the next 12 days, the road began answering in pieces. On November 28th, Wesley returned from the South Fork at the hour he had promised and reported no missing supplies. On December 1st, he found fresh boot marks beside an unused post hole near the upper road, too blurred by wind to match the prints behind the pine shelter. On December 4th, Ruth found one flake of blue paint pressed into crusted snow near the same hole. It matched company colors, but proved no ownership. She wrapped it in paper and placed it inside her route book, labeling where and when, not who. On December 6th, a freight driver mentioned seeing the yellow scarf man at a distance near Mason's timber cut. Wesley wrote the report in his own hand and added that the driver could not swear to the face. He came back from every route check when he said he would. If snow slowed him, he sent word. He did not enter the office without permission. He did not ask what Ruth had written or whether she believed him. His shoulder changed from injury to stiffness. He could work a full day, though long rope pulls left him, rubbing the joint near supper. Ruth stopped ordering him away from every heavy task and began assigning what he could safely carry. Trust did not arrive as a revelation. It gathered in small completed promises. A lantern filled, a gate latched, a report stripped of guesswork, gloves left drying near the stove, because Wesley remembered hers cracked when placed too close to heat. By December 7th, Ruth could tell the hour from the sound of his horse returning to the yard. That knowledge unsettled her more than missing wood. Near dusk, they rode back from the pine shelter after replacing the last of the split logs. The air had cleared, leaving the road hard beneath a thin silver crust. Ruth's mare stepped onto hidden ice and lost her front footing. The animal lurched left. Ruth caught the saddle horn, but her boot slipped from the stirrup. Wesley brought the dun alongside without reaching for her body. He held out his right hand. "Open, waiting, take it." Ruth could have steadied herself alone. Both of them knew it. She placed her gloved palm in his. His grip closed firmly enough to hold her balance, and no more. She found the stirrup. He released her as soon as she sat square. The contact lasted seconds. Its meaning followed them home. In the tack room, they settled the horses by lantern light. Ruth hung the damp bridles and turned to find Wesley closer than she expected. Cold leather, Wool and smoke clung to his coat. "Mason paid you," she said. It was not a question this time. Wesley's right hand moved toward the inside of his coat. Ruth watched the motion stop. "He offered work." "That is not what I said." "No." "Did you take his money?" Wesley looked toward the door, then back to her. "Ruth, you have had 12 days to improve that answer." He stepped nearer, not touching. Desire had grown in the spaces between ordinary work, and now it stood between them, with nowhere honest to go. Wesley lifted his right hand and stopped before her face. He waited. Ruth did not retreat. His breath warmed the cold air between them. She wanted the touch. That was precisely why she refused it. "Not while I still have to wonder what you did not answer." His hand dropped at once. Pain crossed his face, but no anger followed. "You were right to stop." Later, with Two Willows settled and the kitchen lamp burning low, Wesley stood alone in the loft. His bedroll remained bound by the braided rawhide strap. He reached inside his coat and took out Mason's folded note. The $5 bill lay behind it. This time he did not return them to the pocket. He climbed down and crossed the yard toward Ruth's office. The clock inside the house had just passed midnight, carrying December 7th into the 8th, when the emergency bell struck 3 times. The third strike of the emergency bell caught Wesley halfway across the yard, with Mason Griggs' note in one hand and the $5 bill folded behind it. Ruth came out of the office, fastening her coat. "Where?" she called. A freight boy clung to the bell rope, breath tearing from him. "Wagon overturned near the False Fork. Driver's alive, I think. Couldn't stand." Snoth turned toward the stable. Low sled. 2 blankets, splints, lamp oil. Wesley put the paper and money back inside his coat. The truth had waited too long already. Now a man might die while he offered it. Within minutes, the bays were harnessed. Ruth drove. Wesley rode the dun beside the sled, his left shoulder stiff from the cold but no longer weak enough to govern every movement. Snow crossed the road in white ribbons. At the true South Fork, a fresh wheel track cut east where no maintained winter route should go. Ruth followed it toward the washout. The overturned wagon lay below a low rise, one rear wheel turning slowly in the wind. A loose horse stood 20 yards away with broken reins dragging. The other remained tangled beside the wagon, kicking whenever the traces tightened. "Driver first," Ruth said. Wesley dismounted and went where she pointed. Ruth approached the trapped horse from the shoulder, speaking until its eyes settled enough for her to cut one twisted trace. Beneath the wagon bed, the driver lay partly sheltered from the snow. Blood had dried along his temple. His left boot sat at an unnatural angle beneath a broken board, but no bone showed through. "Can you hear me?" Ruth asked. His eyelids lifted. "Sign said this way. Do not move yet." She checked his breathing, ribs, neck, and pupils as best she could by lantern light. The head wound looked shallow. The ankle had swollen above the boot. Wesley wedged a broken axle plank beneath the wagon frame, while Ruth eased the man free. When the load shifted, pain tightened Wesley's mouth. He adjusted his stance instead of forcing the shoulder through it. "Blanket under him," Ruth ordered. "Then brace the ankle before we lift." They bound the leg between 2 padded boards and secured the driver to the low sled. Ruth caught the loose horse and tied it behind. The trapped animal could stand once the trace was cut, though one hock bore a shallow scrape. Leaving the freight wagon where it lay, they started toward the pine shelter. Snow had thickened enough to hide the road behind them. 2 miles felt like 6. The driver drifted in and out, once asking whether they had reached Belle Fourche. Ruth kept him awake when she could. Wesley rode near the sled, watching the team rather than the darkness. At the shelter, the replacement wood remained exactly as Ruth had stacked it. The irregular loads had worked. She lit the lamp, built the stove gradually, and settled the injured man beneath 2 blankets with his ankle raised on a saddlebag. Wesley cleared snow from the doorway, banked the north wall, and brought in enough wood for the night. He did not add a log until Ruth told him how warm she wanted the room. Near midnight, the driver's breathing steadied. His hands had regained color. Ruth sat beside the stove, drying her gloves on the bench rather than too near the heat. Wesley stood across from her with damp snow melting from his hair. The note inside his coat seemed louder than the fire. "I was coming to your office when the bell rang," he said. Ruth fed one narrow split into the stove. "With an answer?" "Yes." "You still have it?" His hand moved toward the inner pocket, then stopped. The driver shifted beneath the blankets and opened his eyes. "Water," he whispered. Ruth lifted the cup to his mouth. He swallowed twice, then slept again. When she turned back, Wesley had moved 1 step closer. "I thought the bell might be for you," he said. "You thought I had ridden out alone. I thought you might have gone before I reached the yard. And what would you have done? Forgotten every instruction you gave me." The honesty struck harder because it did not excuse itself. Ruth rested the cup on the shelf. "I was afraid you would. Ride ahead tonight and decide speed mattered more than my judgment. I wanted to, but you did not." "No." The answer joined 12 days of smaller answers, returned hours, plain reports, hands, withdrawn when work was hers. Ruth felt them all at once. Wesley lifted his right hand and paused inches from her cheek. The question was clear. She could refuse. She could ask again about Mason. Instead, Ruth closed the distance. His palm settled lightly against her face. She raised her chin, and their mouths met. The kiss was brief, warm, and fully chosen. Wesley did not pull her closer. Ruth caught the front of his coat, not from fear of falling, but because the certainty of him startled her. Months of loneliness did not vanish. Neither did doubt. Yet for one breath, she allowed desire to stand without being judged for its existence. Wesley drew back first, only far enough to read her face. Ruth did not release his coat immediately. "That was not an answer," she said. "No, but it was not a mistake." "No." The driver coughed beneath the blankets. Wesley removed his coat to cover the man more fully. As he bent, the loosened fold of the inner pocket turned outward. Mason's note slid to the floor. The $5 bill followed and stopped against Ruth's boot. Wesley went still. Ruth looked down. She recognized Mason's hand before she lifted the paper. "Report what winter will make her take." The warmth left her face beneath the memory of Wesley's palm. "How long?" she asked. "Since before the stage wreck." "The money?" "Mason paid me to look over Two Willows." Wesley did not reach for either object. The barns, the spring, the relay traffic, where the winter might make you sell. Ruth unfolded the bill between 2 fingers. "What did you tell him?" "That the barns were sound. The spring was dependable. The station had no permanent hired man. The contract mattered. My price? You never gave me one. I did not know your accounts. Did you know he was moving markers?" "No. I thought he wanted a commercial advantage. After the wreck, I knew it was more. And then I stopped reporting, but kept his money. Yes, kept his note. Yes, asked me about forever." His face tightened. "Yes." Ruth folded the paper along its old crease. "Why?" "At first, I meant to return both when I could face him. Later I kept them because if you knew, you might send me away. You did not hide. This to protect me from Mason." "No, you hid it, so I could not make a choice, that cost you your place here. Wesley took the judgment without retreat. Yes, pain moved through Ruth cleanly without spectacle. You have obeyed every order on the road. You have told the truth about tracks, weather, horses, and strangers. Then you made yourself the one subject I was not allowed to judge. I know. No, now you know. The driver stirred again. Ruth placed the note and money on the shelf beside the lamp, where both remained visible. You are not leaving tonight. The road is closing, and this man needs both of us. At daylight, we return to Two Willows. Your employment continues because the work continues. Nothing personal does. Wesley's gaze dropped to the space where the kiss had been. Understood. Do not ask me to forgive what you have only just admitted. I won't. They worked through the remaining hours without touching. Near dawn on December 9th, the driver woke clear enough to remember the road. Ruth gave him water, waited until he named the shelter and knew the day, then opened her notebook. Tell me about the sign. He frowned toward the roof. Blue board, white arrow. Man was setting it when I came up. Did you know him? Yes, his voice steadied. Mason Grigg. Seen him at the road house. Was he alone? One man held his horse. Narrow face. Yellow scarf. Ruth wrote only what he said. What did Grigg tell you? Said the regular road had drifted shut. Told me east was safer. Ruth read the account back. The driver agreed and made his mark beneath it, because his hand still shook. Wesley witnessed without adding a word. Outside, morning light revealed the road buried under new snow. Inside, Mason's note and $5 waited beside Ruth's notebook. The later false sign now had a witness. The larger danger was no longer whether Wesley had worked for Mason. It was how much his first report had helped Mason choose where Two Willows could be made to fail by the time Ruth brought the injured driver back to Two Willows. On December 10th, the kiss had become less difficult to remember than the truth that followed it. She settled the man in the downstairs room near the stove, raised his splintered ankle on folded blankets, and waited until he could name the ranch, the day, and the road he had taken. Wesley carried in water and wood only when she asked. He did not cross the office threshold when Ruth opened her route book. The note and $5 bill lay wrapped inside a clean sheet of paper beneath her hand. Come in, she said. Wesley entered and stopped before the desk. No apology came first. Ruth preferred that. I know why Mason paid you, she said. I do not know every fact you gave him. Ask. The exact date, October 31st. Where? Grigg's Roadhouse. Who saw the money change hands? His timber foreman and a driver named Cole Mercer. Mercer was drinking. I don't know what he remembers. Ruth wrote both names. What did you report? Wesley answered without shortening the damage. He had said the south barn was sound, the spring dependable, the relay traffic modest but steady. He had told Mason that Ruth worked without a permanent hired man, and that the company contract mattered to the station through winter. He had said the place was maintained better than Grigg claimed. My accounts? Ruth asked. I never saw them. Debt? I did not know whether you had any. A price? None. Did you tell him the shelters could be reached from his timber cut? Wesley's face tightened. I described the road access, which may have shown him how to reach them unseen. Yes, he did not soften it by saying he had not meant that result. Ruth closed the pencil between her fingers. Is there anything else I might learn from Mason, his foreman, or another driver that would make this worse? No, that answer must remain true. It will. She unwrapped the note and bill. These go to Sheriff Finch. Not because $5 proves sabotage. It proves your purpose and Mason's interest. I will take them when I instruct you. Wesley nodded. Ruth placed both inside her route book and tied the strap. For the next 5 days, she kept him employed under narrower terms. He did not ride a route alone. He did not move company supplies without telling her. He gave every report in the yard or kitchen, never behind the closed office door. No touch passed between them. Neither spoke of the shelter kiss. Wesley returned at the hour she named, even when the work could have justified delay. On December 12th, he came back from the South Fork with a broken stirrup leather and no dramatic account of how it happened. On the 13th, he reported no new tracks near the pine shelter. On the 14th, he found one empty post hole beside the upper road and left it untouched until Ruth saw it. His conduct was correct. Ruth refused to call correctness forgiveness. Mason arrived on December 15th in a 2-seat company wagon. The young clerk from Aldrich office sat beside him, shoulders stiff beneath a dark coat. Ruth met them outside. Wesley remained near the stable door, visible but separate. Mason held a folded complaint. The company should suspend Two Willows until Mr. Aldrich returns, he said. A paid scout, a misplaced plate, and a widow's notebook do not make a case. What paid scout? The clerk asked. Mason turned toward Wesley with satisfaction. Ask Brant what I gave him to inspect. Wesley stepped forward only far enough to be heard. $5 to report on the barns, spring, relay traffic, and whether Mrs. Copley might sell before Thor. The clerk stared at him. Mason's smile widened. There, he admits it. I admit what I did, Wesley said. Not what you did. Mason faced Ruth. You sheltered him, used his story, and planted suspicion after he turned against me. Ruth opened her route book and removed Aldrich's receipt. Original route plate TW4 has been in the company's locked cabinet since November 14th. She handed the paper to the clerk. Bent upper corner, 3 punch marks, cedar dust beneath the lower bolt hole. Mr. Aldrich signed for all of it. The clerk read the receipt twice. Mason waved one gloved hand. She could have moved it before surrendering it. Then the plate's present custody cannot prove that, Ruth said. It does prove I have not handled it since. And your driver's statement, recorded after he could name the date, place, and route. He says he saw you setting a later blue board into the snow. Mason's attention shifted toward the downstairs window. A man with a head wound can say anything. Then you may explain your presence through the company inquiry. The clerk folded the receipt. Mr. Aldrich is expected back within days. I can record both accounts. I cannot suspend Mrs. Copley's contract on my own authority. Mason's patience broke at the edges. Another traveler nearly died. After following a board you placed, Ruth said. That remains disputed, the clerk answered. But he did not give Mason what he wanted. Mason looked toward Wesley. Tell her what you said about the spring. Tell her you measured how badly she needed this contract. I already did. The weapon lost force because Ruth had heard it from Wesley first. Mason noticed. So did the clerk. This will not hold, Mason said. Then stop leaning on it, Ruth replied. He left without offering another purchase price. After the wagon disappeared, Ruth returned to the office. Wesley waited until she called him inside. She counted his wages through the week and placed the coins on the desk. You remain employed while the road is in danger. No independent route decisions. No private contact with Mason. Nothing leaves this office without my knowledge. Understood. You are free to leave. Wesley studied the coins. If I leave now, I only spare myself. Staying is not courage if you stay only where you hope to be forgiven. The words landed without anger. He took the wages because refusing them would have made his guilt another burden for her to manage. Then tell me what courage requires. Ruth tied the route book closed over Mason's note and money. Do what I ask when it is harder than doing what makes you feel useful. Before dawn on December 16th, she handed Wesley the wrapped note, the $5 bill, and a written request for a receipt. He rode the 12 miles to Belfourche through packed snow. Reaching town before noon, Sheriff Edgar Finch read Mason's sentence, examined the bill, and listened while Wesley gave the dates, names, and property details without excuse. This proves Grigg paid for information, Finch said. It does not prove he moved a sign. I know. He will say you invented the rest because you wanted to keep your place at Two Willows. Then write that I admitted the money before he could use it. Finch did. He signed a receipt identifying the note and $5 bill, then locked both with the complaint papers. Wesley returned after full dark, his horse white with frost around the breast. Ruth read the receipt at the kitchen table. She folded it once and placed it inside the route book. Finch has both? Yes. And your full account? Yes. She gave him no thanks and no touch. The act was required, not rewarded. From the downstairs room came the sound of the injured driver retching. Ruth reached him first. His skin had gone pale beneath the healing scalp cut, and his answers wandered before he completed them. He called Wesley by another man's name, then asked why the wagon had not yet reached the shelter. Ruth checked his pupils by lamplight and felt the danger change. The ankle could wait, his head could not. A rider arrived before midnight with a second warning. 2 of Mason's men had been seen near the South Fork without freight or timber. Ruth went to the stable and counted the sound teams. Only the bays could manage 12 winter miles at speed. The same pair might be needed if Mason struck Two Willows while they were gone. Behind her, Wesley said, "He needs Belfourche." Ruth looked from the sick man's window to the dark road. Yes. Then which of us takes him? The harder question was which of them she trusted to leave and which she trusted to remain. The choice was Ruth's before Wesley finished asking it. "You take him," she said. The injured driver had vomited again and no longer remembered that they had returned from the pine shelter 6 days earlier. His swollen ankle remained splintered, but the danger now lay behind his eyes. Ruth folded another blanket around his shoulders while Wesley stood at the foot of the bed. "The North Road adds distance," he said. "It avoids the South Fork. Mason's men were seen there, which is why I should stay." "No." Ruth's answer came without heat. "He needs the strongest driver. You can keep the bays steady over the north cut, repair a trace if one fails, and hold him upright when he loses sense. You know what Grigg may do when the only sound team leaves. Yes, then you should take the wagon, and I should keep Two Willows." Ruth tightened the blanket pin. "You are doing it again." Wesley stopped. "Doing what?" "Deciding danger gives you authority." His jaw flexed once. He did not argue. Ruth crossed to the office and returned with a sealed packet. "This is my statement for Mr. Aldrich. You will deliver it unopened. Then you will bring him and Sheriff Finch back with you." Wesley accepted the packet in his right hand. "What if I see trouble behind me?" "You keep going." Ruth. It was the first time he had said her name since the shelter. The sound carried what he did not ask. "Unless the road itself becomes impassable, you do not turn back," she said. "The driver reaches Belfourche. My statement reaches Aldrich. Finch hears your account before Mason chooses which part to tell for you." Wesley looked toward the dark yard. "And you remain here alone. I know the signal bell. I know which doors bar from inside. I know what company property is still in the supply shed. I also know Mason may expect me to leave. He glanced at the wrapped note receipt inside her route book, then at the injured man. Are you certain? Yes, Wesley nodded. One question, one answer. No second attempt to wear it down. They moved the driver into the light wagon before dawn on December 17th. Ruth secured him against folded quilts so his head would not strike the sideboard. Beneath the seat, she placed a shovel, spare trace, lantern, wrapped hot bricks, and a flask of warm broth. The bays stamped clouds into the cold. Wesley climbed to the box. I will bring them back. Bring him there first. He set the team north. Ruth watched until the wagon passed beyond the cottonwoods, then turned toward the company supply shed. The lock remained fast. The prepared replacement route board still hung inside. Blue cedar, white arrow, no iron plate. W4 remained in Mr. Aldrich's locked cabinet in Belle Fourche. She checked every latch twice and began waiting without surrendering the day to fear. The North Road took nearly 5 hours. The injured driver drifted between confusion and sleep. Once insisting they had not yet left the shelter, Wesley kept him awake when he could and stopped only to tighten the blankets or clear packed snow from the break. At the high ridge, the country opened behind them. Smoke rose against the pale sky from the direction of Two Willows, dark, too thick for a chimney. Wesley pulled the bays down to a walk. Every instinct in him turned the wagon around. Ruth in the yard with Mason's men near the fork, hay, timber, oil, horses. A dozen ways one match could become ruin. The driver followed Wesley's gaze with unfocused eyes. Don't, he murmured. Wesley looked down. You know where you are? No, the man swallowed. But I heard her. Heard what? She told you where to go. The smoke thickened. Wesley could reach Two Willows sooner than Belle Fourche. If he turned now, he could also leave a sick man on a winter road, keep Ruth's sealed account from Aldrich, and prove that his need to act mattered more than her judgment. He faced the bays toward town. Stay awake, he told the driver. Try harder. They entered Belle Fourche late in the afternoon. A doctor's assistant and 2 stable hands carried the driver inside, while Wesley kept the sealed packet in his coat. He went first to the stage company office. Mr. Aldrich read Ruth's name across the seal before breaking it. Wesley stood near the door while the superintendent read her account of the false boards, the witness identification, Mason's complaint, Wesley's paid purpose, and the worsening threat to Two Willows. Did you open this? Aldrich asked. No. Did she tell you what it contained? Only that it was her statement. Aldrich folded the pages. Then give me your account separately. Wesley did. He included the $5, the property details, the note, the false sign, the driver's statement, and Mason's men near the South Fork. He left out nothing that made him appear compromised. Aldrich crossed to the iron cabinet. TW4 rested inside exactly as Ruth had surrendered it, wrapped in company cloth. He removed the plate and opened the register. This now belongs with Finch's complaint materials, he said. The company will retain a written description and my earlier receipt. He entered the date, plate number, bent upper corner, 3 punch marks, and prior custody. Then he carried the wrapped iron to Sheriff Edgar Finch's office with Wesley beside him. Finch compared Aldrich's register entry to the receipt Ruth had kept. He examined the plate, signed for it, and placed it in a locked cabinet with Mason's note and $5 bill. You understand, Grigg will say, Mrs. Copley planted all of this before she handed it over, Finch said. Yes. He will say you turned against him because she hired you. Yes. He will say the 2 of you arranged the story after your first report. Wesley met the sheriff's gaze. then write that I admitted the money before Mason made it useful. Finch wrote it. Aldrich ordered a fresh team for the return. They left Belfourche after dark, with Finch riding beside Wesley and Aldrich in the rear seat. Snow reflected enough starlight to show the north road. No one wasted breath on promises. The smoke over Two Willows had thinned by the time they reached the ridge, but the smell met them before the gate. Burned hay, wet ash. Ruth stood in the yard with soot along one cheek and a damp coat over her dress. One side of the hay shed was blackened, but the house, barn, and stable still stood. 2 empty barrels lay on their sides near the pump. Wesley stopped the team and climbed down. His eyes moved over Ruth's face, hands, and clothing. "Are you hurt?" "No." He took one step toward her, then stopped. The space he left belonged to her. Finch and Aldrich went to the burned shed. Ruth led them behind it to the company supply building. The padlock had been forced. Inside, blankets, lamp oil, timber, and spare harness remained. The wall brackets for the replacement root board were empty. Aldrich stared at them. "The blue cedar board? Gone," Ruth said. "The fire drew me to the hay shed. By the time I put it down, someone had opened this door." Finch crouched near the rear threshold. Tracks. 2 sets beyond the fence, wind broke the edges. "I will not name a man from that." Wesley looked toward the south road. "They did not steal it to hide the first false sign." Ruth nodded. "They stole it to make another one." Aldrich entered the office to check the route schedule. Finch followed with Ruth's record of the fire. Wesley remained in the yard, snow melting from his hat brim. "I saw the smoke," he said, "from the ridge. I thought you might. I nearly turned. But you did not." "No." Ruth crossed the space between them and took his right hand, openly. Her fingers settled first. Wesley closed his around them only after her choice was clear. He did not pull her nearer. "You believed I knew what I was asking," she said. His thumb moved once against her glove. "I am learning to." The touch did not erase the note, the money, or the choice he had once withheld from her. It proved one thing only. When fear tested him, he had followed the road she chose. From the office doorway, Aldrich called them inside. His schedule lay open on Ruth's desk. A passenger sled carrying 5 people should have passed the South Fork before sunset, he said. It reached neither Belfourche nor Two Willows. Ruth released Wesley's hand and turned toward the empty wall brackets in the supply shed. Somewhere beyond the ranch, 5 travelers might already be following the stolen blue board into the snow. Ruth knew where the missing sled had gone before Aldrich finished reading the schedule. "The stolen board was not taken to hide what happened here," she said. "It was taken to send them east." Snow pressed against the office windows in dry bursts. 5 passengers had left Belfourche before dusk. If the driver followed the blue board toward the washout, the sled would reach the frozen drainage after dark, when the safe road and the false one looked equally white. Sheriff Finch spread the route map across Ruth's desk. How far from the true fork? Less than 2 miles if they stayed on the old cut. Farther if the runners slid off it. The bank is steep. The upper crust is worse. It holds until the weight crosses the drainage. Finch looked at the soot on Ruth's coat. "You fought a fire tonight. Show us the route and remain here." Ruth was already collecting supplies. A map does not show where the wind hollows a drift or which cottonwood roots still hold the bank. Aldrich closed the company schedule. She knows the winter road better than any man in this room. Ruth chose the low relief sled and the strongest remaining pair. She packed blankets, hot stones wrapped in wool, rope, a shovel, a shielded lantern, rendered fat for stiff harness, and a spare brake block. Wesley came beside her in the stable. "Where do you want me?" Not whether she should stay. Not where he thought he belonged. Ruth felt the difference. Rear team and anchor line. Passenger extraction when I call. Do not leave the horses unless I tell you. Understood. Finch and Aldrich followed in a lighter cutter. The search party left Two Willows before dawn on December 19th. Snow had already blurred the wagon marks near the gate. But Ruth knew where the maintained road should bend west. At the true South Fork, the original post stood bare. No iron plate marked it. TW4 remained locked in Finch's office in Belle Fourche with Mason's note and $5 bill. Fresh sled tracks curved east across ground no company driver should have chosen. Ruth turned the relief team after them. The stolen blue board appeared through the snow as a dark shape beside a new cedar stake. Its white arrow pointed toward the washout. No iron plate was attached. "Leave it standing," Finch said. "I want the placement seen before we move it." Ruth dismounted and examined the tracks around the stake. 2 men, 1 horse. A wagon had waited beyond the rise. "Turn the arrow flat," she said. "If another traveler reaches it before we return, it should point nowhere." Aldrich did so without removing the board. Fresh passenger sled runners continued east. One line cut deeper than the other. "Listing already," Ruth said. "Driver is holding the left runner uphill." They followed at a walk. Wind erased the tracks over exposed ground, but the bays felt the packed hollow beneath loose snow. At the crest above the drainage, Ruth saw a lantern burning low under the tilted body of the passenger sled. The vehicle hung half over the bank. Its right runner had broken through frozen crust. The left runner caught against a cottonwood root. 5 passengers huddled beneath blankets. The driver lay across the footboard with both hands locked on the brake lever. "Do not move," Ruth called. The driver gave a strained laugh. Hadn't planned to. Ruth stopped the relief sled 20 yards uphill. Wesley, rear anchor. He looped the rope twice around the axle, then carried it to the base of a cottonwood. His left shoulder had healed enough for full work, but he set the strain low and used his legs as Ruth had taught him. Finch, second line to their rear frame. Aldrich, hold our bays. Do not let them back. She crawled toward the tilted sled on hands and knees, spreading her weight over the crust. How many hurt? "Mrs. Harlan twisted an ankle," the driver said. "Mr. Pike can't feel his fingers." Mrs. Bell stopped shivering. Ruth reached the passengers. The elderly woman sat upright, only because 2 others held her there. Her eyes were open, but her skin had gone pale around the mouth. "Mrs. Bell, listen to me. We are moving you first." The woman blinked once. Ruth tied the rescue line around her own waist, then secured Mrs. Bell in the loop before signaling uphill. "Take strain." Wesley tightened the rope without pulling. Now. He drew them across the crust in steady inches. At the relief sled, he lifted Mrs. Bell only when Ruth ordered it, one arm behind her shoulders and one beneath her knees. He set her between the hot stones and wrapped her in blankets. Ruth returned for the others. The young mother with the twisted ankle came next. Then her husband, his hands numb but still flexible. The 5th passenger, a salesman with a shallow cut above one brow, talked without pause until Finch told him to save his breath. The driver came last. The instant his weight left the tilted sled, the broken runner shifted. The vehicle dropped another foot toward the drainage. Wesley took the anchor line hard. His boots slid through snow, then held. Ruth reached the rope beside him. "Do not fight it with your shoulder." "I'm not. Your face disagrees." "My face doesn't have a vote." Under other circumstances, she might have smiled. Finch secured a second turn around the cottonwood, and the sled stopped moving. All 5 passengers were alive. Mrs. Bell began to shiver again beneath the blankets. Ruth welcomed the tremor. Her body had begun answering warmth. A yellow light appeared beyond the cut bank. The pine shelter. Someone was moving inside. Aldrich narrowed his eyes. No traveler should be there. Hoofbeats sounded behind the shelter, then stopped. Finch drew his revolver, but kept it low. Ruth turned to Wesley. Stay with the passengers and the team. His attention fixed on the shelter. Mason may run. Then Finch will stop him. I can reach him faster. That is not the work I gave you. The old impulse crossed his face. Danger answered by pursuit, fear answered by action. Then he looked at Mrs. Bell beneath the blankets and the frightened bays shifting in their traces. I stay here. Ruth left him holding the lines. Finch approached the shelter from the west. Aldrich went east. Ruth remained near the relief sled where she could see both men and every passenger. Mason Grigg came through the shelter door carrying split pine. The narrow-faced man in the yellow scarf followed, with another armload. A wagon stood behind the building with its tailboard down. More shelter wood had already been loaded. Beside it lay a bolt wrench, a tin of blue paint, a white arrow slat, and the hardware stripped from the stolen replacement board. Mason saw the rescued passengers and understood at once that the false road had failed. Put the wood down, Finch called. The hired man obeyed. Mason did not. You have no right to hold me for carrying fuel. Aldrich stepped to the wagon. This is company property. Wood has no owner once it's cut. The board hardware does. Mason dropped the pine and moved toward his horse. Finch blocked him. Do not make this harder. Wesley shifted one step away from the relief sled. Ruth said his name. He stopped before she had to say more. Mason noticed. Still taking orders, Brant? Wesley kept one hand on the bays. The right ones. The hired man's courage broke before Mason's anger did. He told me nobody would die, he said. Mason turned on him. Shut your mouth. The man backed toward Finch. He said the company would blame Two Willows. Said we'd put the board back before daylight. Finch's voice remained steady. Start at the first marker. The hired man looked toward the passengers, then at Ruth. Before the stage wreck, Grigg had me take the iron plate from the True Fork, TW4. We used a wrench, mounted it on fresh cedar above the washout, and waited near the timber cut for the November 3rd stage. Ruth felt the opening question close with terrible precision. Who sent word after the coach turned east? Finch asked. I did. Grigg was waiting with his wagon. He reached Two Willows before anyone could ride for him. Mason lunged toward the man, but Finch caught his arm and forced him back without striking him. Continue. Later, we took shelter wood and the lamp glass. Grigg used temporary blue boards. Last night, we fired the hay shed so we could take the company replacement board. He said the storm would bury the tracks and we'd pull the board before daylight. Why? Aldrich asked. The hired man swallowed. Company was choosing one winter stop after thaw. Grigg's timber agreement won't be renewed without relay water. His own well runs low when freight teams crowd it. He needed the Two Willows, spring, before spring review. Mason's face had gone flat with hatred. A frightened employee will say anything. Then the statement will stand beside the board, wrench, paint, stolen wood, wagon, stage, schedule, and passenger accounts, Finch said. He did not call the matter settled. He did not need to. Aldrich recorded the replacement board's condition and company colors before Finch removed it from the false fork. The board, wrench, paint, arrow slat, and hardware went into the sheriff's wagon under Aldrich's signed identification. Finch bound Mason's wrists in front with a leather restraint. The hired man surrendered without force. "You'll both answer before the justice of the peace," Finch said. "The complaint will decide what follows." Mason looked past him at Ruth. "The company still knows. Brant came to measure what winter would make you sell for." The words struck where the kiss and note still lived together. Ruth did not turn from them. "So do I." Mason had expected shame. She gave him knowledge. Aldrich took the cutter toward Two Willows with Mrs. Bell and the injured mother. Finch followed with Mason, the hired man, and the recovered evidence. Ruth and Wesley remained long enough to secure the relief team and move the other passengers safely. Only when every blanket was wrapped and every harness checked did Ruth step close to him. Snow melted along the brim of his hat. "I wanted to go after him," Wesley said. "I know." He lifted his right hand and stopped before her cheek. The pause was still a question. Ruth leaned into his palm. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Wesley held her with care, one hand at her back and the other light against her face. No kiss. The embrace carried a harder truth. He had stayed where she needed him when every instinct urged him toward the easier kind of courage. "You kept the team," Ruth said. "You told me to. And you listened." His breath warmed her hair. "Yes." Behind them, the false road lay under new snow. Ahead, Two Willows still had to survive the company inquiry. But the man who had once hidden the truth to keep his place had just watched his enemy run and chosen, instead to remain where Ruth placed him. By December 22nd, the snow had hardened over the false road, but the damage done there had not yet been judged by anyone whose decision could restore Ruth's name. The inquiry took place in the Belle Fourche stage and freight company office, not in a courtroom. Mr. Aldrich said that twice before Mason Grigg was brought in under Sheriff Finch's watch. "This meeting concerns company property, contract performance, and route privileges," he said. "The county complaint proceeds separately before the justice of the peace." Mason wore no irons at the table, but Finch stood near enough to make the limit of his freedom clear. Ruth sat across from him, with her route book closed beneath one hand. Wesley took the chair beside the wall. Not beside her. That was her arrangement. He had accepted it without question. Present were Aldrich, the company clerk, Finch, the injured freight driver from the overturned wagon, and two passengers from the sled. The driver entered on crutches, his ankle still wrapped and his head wound reduced to a narrow, dark line beneath his hair. Mrs. Bell had remained under a doctor's care. Her nephew and the young mother, with the twisted ankle, came in her place. No crowd gathered. No one applauded when Ruth entered. The correction she needed would have to be written, signed, and enforced. Finch began with the original route plate. He laid TW4 on the table. The bent upper corner and 3 punch marks showed beneath the black paint. "Received from Mr. Aldrich after prior company custody," Finch said. Aldrich opened his register and read the November 14th entry aloud. "Plate number, condition, cedar dust beneath the lower bolt hole, and Ruth Copley's transfer to company safekeeping." Then he read the later entry recording its transfer to Finch. The company clerk compared both descriptions. They matched. Finch next brought in the stolen blue cedar board, the bolt wrench, the paint tin, the white arrow slat, and the hardware recovered from Mason's wagon near the pine shelter. Aldrich identified the board as company property kept at Two Willows for replacement use. "The original iron plate was not attached to this board," he said. "It remained in custody here, then with Sheriff Finch. Mason leaned back. A company board can be stolen by anyone. Yes, Ruth said. That is why I brought records instead of conclusions. Aldrich nodded for her to continue. Ruth opened her route book. She did not tell the story as grievance. She gave dates. November 3rd, runaway stage followed TW4 east toward the washout. November 6th, shelter fuel missing. November 14th, original plate surrendered and receipted. November 24th, upper shelter lantern found without its glass chimney. December 8th, injured driver identified Mason, placing a later blue board. December 18th, hay shed fire drew Ruth away while the replacement board was taken. December 19th, 5 passengers found beyond the false fork. The route book held weather, distances, supply counts, witness names, and the limits of every observation. When she finished, Aldrich asked, "Mrs. Copley, did you at any point remove the original plate from company custody after November 14th? No. Did you instruct anyone to place a false board? No. Did you accuse Mr. Grigg in your written records before a witness placed him at the later sign? No. The injured driver spoke next. He described the blue board, Mason's warning that the regular road was closed, and the yellow scarf man holding Mason's horse. His voice shook once when he recalled waking beneath the overturned wagon. He steadied it himself. The sled passenger described the stolen board at the false fork and Ruth's rescue instructions at the frozen drainage. The young mother told how Wesley had remained with the anchor line and horses while Ruth came down the bank for them. She did not know the private reason that mattered. She knew only the act. Finch handed Aldrich the yellow scarf man's signed statement. The man had made his mark beneath a full account after Finch read it back to him. It named Mason's order to remove TW4, the fresh cedar, used above the washout, the waiting place near the timber cut, the later false boards, the fire diversion, and the plan to retrieve the replacement board before daylight. Mason pushed one hand flat against the table. A frightened hired man protects himself by blaming his employer. That is possible, Finch said, which is why his statement does not stand alone. He touched the recovered wrench, paint, board hardware, and stolen shelter wood listed in his inventory. Nor do these objects stand alone. They sit beside the stage schedule, the company receipts, the driver's account, the passenger accounts, and Mr. Grigg's presence at the shelter. Mason turned toward Wesley. And the paid spy? Does he stand alone? Aldrich looked to Wesley. Mr. Brant, state your part. Wesley rose. He did not repeat everything Ruth had already recorded. Mason Grigg paid me $5 on October 31st to inspect Two Willows and report whether winter might make Mrs. Copley sell. I described the barns, spring, traffic, staffing, and road access. I did not know he meant to move signs or strip shelters. After the stage wreck, I stopped reporting. I concealed the payment from Mrs. Copley because I feared she would dismiss me. I surrendered the note and money to Sheriff Finch before Mr. Grigg used them publicly. Mason smiled without humor. So the company is asked to believe a man who lied to his employer. No, Wesley said. You're asked to believe the records, objects, and witnesses. My admission tells you where I failed. It does not make Mrs. Copley's work less true. Aldrich watched him. Who directed the sled rescue? Mrs. Copley. Who identified the likely false route? Mrs. Copley. Who kept the route records? Mrs. Copley. Who ordered you to remain with the passengers instead of pursuing Mr. Grigg? Wesley's gaze shifted once toward Ruth, then returned to Aldrich. Mrs. Copley? Yes. Mason's chair scraped. Because he has decided he wants what I wanted. Ruth spoke before Wesley could. No, Mr. Grigg wanted my spring without my consent. Mr. Brant's wishes are not part of this contract review. The distinction silenced the room more effectively than outrage. Aldrich closed the register. The company finds that Two Willows remained operational, documented its losses, protected passengers, and assisted in recovering company property. The unsafe station complaint against Ruth Copley is corrected as unsupported by the evidence now available. The clerk began writing. Aldrich continued. The Two Willows winter relay contract is renewed in Ruth Copley's name. Mr. Grigg's winter relay privilege is cancelled. His timber hauling arrangement through this company will not be renewed. Company supplies, taken from the shelters and replacement stock, will be restored at company expense. Ruth accepted the written contract. Aldrich placed the pen beside it. She read every line before signing. Her name stood alone beneath the terms. Wesley did not move closer. Mason's face had gone pale with anger. You are taking one route from me on the word of thieves and women. Finch stepped between him and the table before Aldrich could answer. The company has taken its privileges. The county will decide the complaint. Mason was removed without further speech. Finch returned TW4, the replacement board, and the tools to his locked evidence storage after each item was recorded. Nothing left with Ruth except the contract, the corrected notice, and her own route book. That afternoon, she stopped at Hales's store for lamp oil. Mr. Hales opened his ledger. Usual 30 days, he asked. Yes. He entered the account without apology or favor. Ruth preferred it that way. By December 27th, Two Willows had settled back into winter work. Snow still held the north cut. The road would not open for months. Wesley repaired a stall latch in the stable while Ruth checked the evening team. His bedroll remained in the loft, still bound tight by its braided rawhide strap. Aldrich posted the correction today, he said. I heard. Mason's name will stay tied to the complaint now. Yes, Wesley set the hammer down. Mine may stay tied to it too. Ruth waited. If my being here keeps people wondering whether Two Willows hired a crooked scout and changed his story, I can leave when the road is safe enough. You can, Ruth said. That was always true. He absorbed the answer without pretending it did not hurt. I thought it might protect your reputation. By deciding for me again, the question stopped him. Ruth closed the stall gate. You do not repair one mistake by making a cleaner version of it. Then tell me what you want. Two Willows remains mine. The spring remains mine. Your work and any future between us are separate choices. I understand. Do you? She stepped nearer. I will not learn another hidden decision from another man, not one made against me, and not one made for my supposed good. Wesley's voice lowered. You won't. I do not yet know what forever looks like. He did not answer with another promise. Then I won't name it for you. Ruth crossed the last pace herself. Wesley opened his arms only after she moved into them. The embrace was brief, warmer than the stable and steadier than the kiss they had lost. Beneath the weight of the note, he did not ask for more. Ruth stepped back when she chose. Outside, winter still owned the road. Inside the loft, Wesley's bedroll remained strapped for travel. He stayed anyway. By the time the North Cut opened in early April, Wesley had stayed through more than snow. He had stayed through weeks when nothing burned, no wagon overturned, no witness arrived with fresh proof, and no danger gave either of them an excuse to speak more boldly than ordinary life allowed. From late December into January, he checked the shelters, trained the younger bay to stand under sudden harness strain, and returned every evening when he said he would. In February, a thaw softened the South Road for 2 days and froze it harder the third. Ruth and Wesley argued over whether to send a freight team through before dawn. She said the shaded bend would hold black ice. He said the wagon could beat the temperature if it left early. Ruth refused. Wesley accepted the order, then rode the bend alone at first light and returned with a strip of ice thick enough to prove her right. He placed it in a pan by the stove without making a speech. In March, a spring storm buried the north fence. They worked side by side for 6 hours, quarreled over a gate brace, corrected the angle together, and ate supper without either withdrawing into wounded pride. He never asked whether she had forgiven him. She never pretended the note no longer mattered. Trust rebuilt itself in work too ordinary for witnesses. By April 8th, the road beyond the North Cut had dried enough for a rider to pass without breaking crust. Winter had ended, in fact, not merely by the calendar. Ruth knew before sunrise because she heard the braided rawhide strap tightened in the loft above the stable. The sound was small, leather drawn through a buckle, a bedroll made ready. She stood beneath the loft ladder with one hand on the rail. Wesley came down carrying his saddlebag. His shoulder had healed, though cold mornings still made him roll it once before lifting. He stopped when he saw her. "You're packing," Ruth said. "The road is open." "I know, and that answers the question for you." Wesley set the saddlebag on the floor. "Our agreement was until winter ended. An agreement can be renewed. It can. Yet you decided to leave before asking." He drew a breath. "I thought assuming I could stay would take the choice from you." Ruth stepped into the stable aisle, and leaving without asking does not. "I meant to spare you from having to dismiss me. You still decided what would spare me." The correction struck cleanly. Wesley lowered his eyes, not from shame, but recognition. "You're right." Ruth had spent 3 months watching him learn that protection without permission could become another form of control. She would not let him escape the lesson, simply because his intention now looked noble. "I do not need you to vanish before I can say no," she said. "I need you to remain long enough to hear my answer." Wesley waited. No defense, no promise. Ruth went to the tack room table and brought out a folded sheet she had written the night before. "If you stay, the work changes." He did not reach for the paper until she held it out. "Year-round wages," she said. "You take charge of route scouting and team conditioning. Your savings remain yours. The spring, house, barn, and land remain mine. They should. We review the arrangement after 1 year. Either of us may end it with fair notice. The loft remains your quarters unless marriage is chosen later." Wesley read the page slowly. "This is work. Yes. Not a proposal. No." He looked up. "And if marriage never comes?" Ruth held his gaze. "Would you still take the work?" "Yes." The answer came without delay. "Why?" "Because the work matters. Because Two Willows matters. Because I respect the way you run both." He folded the paper once, then stopped himself before putting it away. "And because leaving just to prove I can would be another kind of cowardice." Ruth felt the truth of that settle between them. "Then sign it after breakfast." Wesley placed the paper on the table. "There's another answer you deserve before that." She did not rescue him from saying it. Outside, meltwater tapped from the eaves. A horse shifted in the nearest stall. Wesley stood with his hands open at his sides. "I love you." The words were direct enough to leave nowhere for either of them to hide. Ruth did not move. He continued, "I love the way you count what people miss. I love that you would rather lose credit than buy it with false humility. I love that you stop me when strength turns stupid, and that you expect me to learn instead of rewarding me for meaning well." His voice roughened, but he did not look away. "I want ordinary mornings, bad roads, honest arguments. I want the right to come back after every one of them. I want to work here even if you never marry me, and I want to marry you if you ever freely choose it." Ruth's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Henry's memory rose without warning. His hand on the kitchen latch, his coat drying near the stove, fever taking him before either of them understood the danger. 8 years of marriage had ended not through betrayal, but through a door death closed without permission. For 3 years, Ruth had treated permanence as a promise the world might punish her for believing. Wesley had not erased that lesson. He had given her another. A choice could still be made even when no one could guarantee its length. "Henry did not fail me," she said. "I know. Loving you does not replace him. It shouldn't. And choosing again does not mean I have forgotten what loss costs. No." Wesley did not step closer. He left the distance hers. Ruth crossed it. She climbed the loft ladder before he understood why. His bedroll lay against the wall, bound tight by the braided rawhide strap, ready for the road as it had been since November. Ruth knelt and worked the buckle loose. The leather resisted at first, stiff from months of strain. Then it gave beneath her fingers. Wesley stood below the opening, watching. "I gave you winter because winter had an end," she said. She lifted the loosened strap and let it fall against the blanket. "Stay when the road opens." Wesley came up one rung, then stopped. What does stay mean? Ruth appreciated the question. He would not claim more than she offered. "It means hired scout. It means the man I love. It means a possible husband after one ordinary month when no one is bleeding, freezing, lying, or trying to steal the road." The tension in his face broke into something warmer than relief. "One ordinary month, at least, and if we argue, we will. If I'm wrong, you will be. You plan to enjoy this, more than I should." Wesley stepped onto the loft floor but remained beyond reach, until Ruth closed the space. She took the front of his shirt in both hands and kissed him. Not the brief, startled kiss at the pine shelter. Not a promise interrupted by hidden paper. This kiss carried full knowledge. Ruth chose it with her whole body, rising toward him, drawing him nearer. Wesley answered, with one hand at her waist and the other along her back, holding without taking control. When she deepened the kiss, he followed. When she slowed, he slowed. No urgency tried to turn consent into momentum. The passion came from permission freely given. Ruth felt months of restraint gather into warmth rather than pressure. She ended the kiss when she chose, though her hands remained against his chest. Wesley rested his forehead lightly against hers, only after she stayed close. "I love you," he said again, softer now but no less certain. Ruth let herself smile. "You said it well the first time. I may need practice saying it on ordinary days. That can be arranged." They agreed. The work would begin under the new terms at once. They would wait 1 month before announcing a betrothal. If ordinary life still held, they would plan an autumn wedding after the full working season. No land would change hands. No wage would become courtship. No promise would be hidden inside another. Wesley signed the work agreement at the kitchen table after breakfast. Ruth signed beneath him as owner and operator of Two Willows. Later, he carried his saddlebag back to the loft. The bedroll remained where it had always been. The difference lay in the strap. It was loose now, and neither of them tightened it. 6 weeks after the north cut opened, Wesley's bedroll still lay in the loft, but no saddlebag waited beside it. Spring had turned the road brown and firm beneath the wheels. Freight teams stopped again at Two Willows. Travelers drank from Ruth's spring, paid for feed, and continued toward Belle Fourche without studying the buildings, as though deciding whether a widow could keep them standing. The station was not rich, it was working. Ruth preferred the difference. The company had replaced the stolen shelter wood, lamp glass, and route supplies. Wesley had fitted protective covers over the exposed lantern brackets and trained the younger bay to hold steady when chains struck iron. His wages remained his. The spring, house, barn, and land remained Ruth's. He kept a small account book of his own savings in the loft and gave her written route reports at the office door before entering. Their new arrangement had survived rain, a cracked wagon tongue, 2 missed meals, and 1 disagreement over whether a tired team needed rest or merely a slower pace. Ruth won that argument. Wesley admitted it before supper. 1 ordinary month passed without fire, overturned wagons, hidden money, or danger making decisions for them. On May 9th, Ruth and Wesley announced their betrothal to Mr. Aldrich, Hales, and the freight drivers who regularly used Two Willows. No crowd gathered. Hales offered a formal congratulations, then asked whether Ruth still wanted lamp oil on 30 days. Yes, she said. Wesley did not answer for her. They planned an autumn wedding after the full working season, late enough to know whether ordinary life could bear the weight of what crisis had begun. Ruth had not given him land. Wesley had not asked. He remained in the loft, though some evenings they sat together on the back step after the work was finished, their shoulders touching while the last light faded over the road. Affection had become less dramatic and more certain. Ruth trusted that more. On May 21st, Aldrich arrived from Belle Fourche, carrying a flat parcel wrapped in company cloth. He brought no clerk and no formal wagon, only a bay horse dusted from the 12-mile road. Ruth met him beside the office. Wesley came from the stable with a currycomb still in one hand. Sheriff Finch received the justice's permission to release 1 item, Aldrich said. He set the parcel on Ruth's desk and opened his coat. From an inside pocket he produced 2 papers. The original plate has been examined, described, and entered in the complaint record. Finch retains the replacement board, wrench, paint, hardware, witness statements, and the hired man's marked confession. The county complaint continues. Ruth read the first paper. It carried Finch's signature and listed black iron route plate TW4. Bent upper corner, 3 punch marks released to the Belle Fourche Stage and Freight Company on May 20th, 1897. The second authorized Ruth Copley, operator of Two Willows, to restore the plate at the true South Fork. Mason has not been sentenced, Wesley asked. Not yet, Aldrich said. The justice will decide what proceeds. The company has already cancelled his relay, privilege, and timber arrangement. What remains belongs to the county. Ruth appreciated the plainness of that answer. Consequence without invented certainty. She unwrapped the plate. Winter had left faint rust along one bolt hole, but the black paint and white letters remained. TW4, the same iron that had sent a stage toward the washout, now rested on her desk under lawful release. Aldrich handed her the receipt book. Ruth checked the description against the plate, then signed her name. Only after she finished did Wesley touch the iron. Feels heavier, he said. It is not. No. He looked at the signed papers. It just belongs somewhere again. They loaded a new cedar board, tools, bolts, and the released plate into the light wagon. Ruth drove to the true South Fork with Wesley beside her. The road passed the field where winter snow had once hidden every rut. Now grass pushed green through the ditches, and meadowlarks called from fence posts. At the fork, the old cedar post leaned west above the stone Henry had set beneath it years before. Ruth rested one hand on the weathered wood. "It carried the marker long enough," she said. "Pull it," Wesley asked. "Yes, leave the stone." He obeyed. The old post came free with 3 steady pulls. Wesley set it beside the ditch rather than throwing it aside. Ruth chose the place for the new board 2 feet farther from the wheel track, where drifts would be less likely to bury the lower arrow. "There," she said. Wesley dug the post hole, while Ruth checked its line from both approaches. When he set the cedar upright, he held it until she confirmed the angle. Then they packed earth and stone around the base. Ruth bolted TW4 beneath the company directional slat. One arrow pointed toward Belle Fourche. The other pointed west toward Two Willows. A gust came off the open ground and made the new board tremble before the earth had fully settled. Wesley studied it, then looked toward the wagon. "Needs 2 ties until the ground firms. There is rope under the seat. I have better." He climbed into the wagon bed and lifted his bedroll. Ruth had not noticed him bring it. The braided rawhide strap lay loose around the blanket, just as she had left it in April. Wesley unbuckled it and tested the leather between both hands. "That is a good travel strap," Ruth said. "Was." He took his knife and cut the rawhide into 2 equal lengths. The first strip secured the lower edge of TW4 to the cedar board. The second held the directional slat against the spring wind. Ruth ran one finger over the cut end. "You ruined it." "I am not traveling that way anymore." The words did not sound like a vow made under snow. No danger trapped him at Two Willows. The road behind them was dry, open, and broad enough to carry him anywhere. He had chosen the strap's final use because departure no longer needed to remain ready in his hands. Ruth stepped close, took his coat lapel, and kissed him. Briefly, freely. Wesley answered with warmth rather than surprise, one hand settling at her waist until she drew back. She kept hold of his hand afterward. Together they stood beside the restored marker and looked down both roads. "It points home now," Wesley said. "It always did, not to me." Ruth linked her fingers through his. "It does now." They rode back side by side, leading the light wagon behind them, because neither wished to sit apart on the box. Two Willows came into view beyond the cottonwoods. Barn doors open to the mild air, smoke lifting from the kitchen chimney, fresh boards pale where the hay shed had burned. Not perfect, not untouched. Home did not require either. At the outer gate, Wesley reined in. "Still certain?" Ruth studied the man beside her. He had once arrived with everything he owned bound for departure, and a hidden $5 purpose inside his coat. He had stayed through judgment, learned to obey when obedience cost him, confessed without claiming reward, and accepted love without treating it as ownership. Her worth had never depended on his choice. That was why she could choose him without surrendering herself. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. Wesley smiled. "I will." They passed through the gate together. Behind them, the restored TW4 stood at the true South Fork, held against the wind by 2 strips cut from an old traveling strap. One arrow pointed toward Belle Fourche. The other pointed home to Two Willows.